Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you. Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger with Trad Jazz Today, and my next guest is kind of a rare commodity around here because a lot of reed players, for some reason, don't want to come on this show. I've interviewed over 50 people by now, and I think I've only got maybe a handful of reed players who have come on. And I've got a theory about that. But anyway, this next gentleman is somebody who is extraordinary reed player. Is currently fronting when he gets a chance to, he's currently fronting the Tommy Dorsey band, and in the past has fronted the Benny Goodman band, and all kinds of other things. I met him when he was still running around with the Bill Allred and the classic American jazz band, and I think we may have met up in Mammoth Lake several times. But that's beside the point. Here he is, Mr. Terry Myers. Hey, Terry.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
It's good to see you.
Good to see you. And I'm still wondering why the reed players are so reluctant to appear.
Well, I'm not sure if reluctance is the right word, but I found out that backline guys are really anxious to come on and have a voice on this show. And the frontline guys, not so much. And I think maybe it's because they're always at the front of the stage and have a chance to interact.
Well, perhaps. You never know.
But I do have Tom Kubis has come on and done an interview, and a bunch of other guys that started in trad and ended up being bebop gods like yourself.
I'm not a bopper like Tom.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do.
So anyway, it's so good. You're my first interview of the day, so I washed my mouth this morning. You can't do anything with it. Okay, here you go. So Richland, Iowa.
Yes.
Is where you were born.
Yes, I was born in a farmhouse 5 miles southeast of Richland.
I was actually born outside of David City, Nebraska, off a farm. So don't I look like a Nebraska boy? I'm kidding. My dad married a Filipina during the war, and I came out like this.
You're lucky.
I guess. And so you're currently living in Florida, in Maine.
Yes.
Cool.
I actually live in Winter Springs now. I did live in Maitland for about 25 years, but I live in Winter Springs.
Where's that located?
It's about 10 or 12 miles north of downtown Orlando.
You like that area? I mean, obviously.
I do. I like it. Of course, right now we're in that time of year where you basically measure your activity level by the heat and humidity. But, you know, I've been in Florida for almost 40 years, and so you learn how to measure your active schedules. Like, I love to play golf, but not at this time of year.
I know. I'm a marching band drum and bugle corps guy. Actually, also, I teach high school in that age group. And we had our finals down in Orlando at the Orange Bowl several times.
Yes.
And between the rain that you never know when it's going to hit, never know when it's going to let up, and the heat, I admire those of you who stick it out in that area.
Well, yeah, but you know, then of course, you're in California and you get good weather out there too. But we have about 6 months out of the year where it's just absolutely perfect. And then about the other 6 months where you depend on air conditioning and shade.
Well, today we're expecting it to hit 108 in Anaheim.
Oh, see, we never get that hot.
Yeah.
Our heat index does, but the actual temperature will run 95 to 98 for about 5 or 6 months straight. But then you throw 80% humidity on top of that. It's pretty tough.
I remember being in the South and going through a shopping center where the stores were separated by open airways, and you go out and all of a sudden shirt would stick to your body. Then you go into a Macy's or something and dry off by the time you hit the next door, and then it would hit. Anyway.
Yep.
I'm reminiscing.
Yeah, I used to play a show at Epcot. I was in a band that did a show either 4 or 5 times a day, like a 25-minute show. And by the time we got halfway through the show, you'd be soaked to your underwear, and then go back to our break area and dry off, and then go back out there and do that again, just in and out. And it got to the point where a lot of people were getting sick because their resistance would get so low. So a lot of times I would just find a shade tree and sit under the tree so I wouldn't have all that drastic temperature change. But it was brutal because the temperature on stage was about 125 degrees.
Oh my. Yeah, I played at Knott's Berry Farm for 9 years here in Buena Park, and our stage faced the sun directly. And it wasn't a good thing. Now, did you start on reeds, or did you start on piano, or did you start singing?
No, I started on saxophone.
Wow, that's pretty unusual, actually, I would think.
It is, and it's not the ideal way to start. Ideally, you're better to start on clarinet because it's very easy to move from clarinet to saxophone.
Right. No, I went the other way because I also teach. So I went from flute to saxophone to clarinet, and that register key will kill you every time.
Well, it's not just the break that plagues everybody, but the discipline with a saxophone, all you have to do is press the keys. You don't have to cover the holes.
That's true.
And so you have to be much more precise. In fact, you see right here, I was practicing when you called, and I just practiced clarinet because it transfers to the sax, but definitely it's a one-way street. If I practice my saxophone, I get nothing for the clarinet out of that.
You use different embouchures for the two, don't you?
I probably should more than I do. If I'm being really conscious about it, yes, I'll be more strict with the clarinet. But since I am a saxophone player first, when the heat's on, I really tend to forget all about that. And I probably have a saxophone embouchure anyway. So I use a more open mouthpiece on my clarinet to really kind of accommodate that urge,
Sure. So, okay, so then you must use a fairly stiff reed.
I do, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, us band director guys know that kind of stuff. And you started at age 10.
Yeah.
I hope that was an alto, not a Barry.
It was. Yeah, because I was a little kid, I was pretty small. And my dad, my mother's family was very musical. Even though we were living out on the farm, my dad really wanted me to be a musician because he could see from the time I was 2 or 3 years old that I really was moved by it. And I had, you remember the trumpet player, Don Ellis?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he was my cousin.
Oh, really? The Electric Band and Pussy Wiggle Stomp and all those things, huh?
Yeah. Okay. Don's father and my mother were first cousins.
Oh, wow.
Our grandfathers were brothers. They were coal miners in northern Missouri and southern Iowa. And then another cousin of mine, the same relationship, was Bill Daly, the TV actor that was on Bob Newhart.
Sure.
Bill was a great bass player.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and his mother was in Ellis, like my mother. And his mother was my mom's first cousin. And so anyway, my dad could see that there were various members of the Ellis family that were pretty talented musically. And he was working, we had moved to Des Moines when I was 9, and he was working in the maintenance department of a hospital. And one day he was telling the guys at work, I have this kid that's going to be a musician, but I don't have anything for him to play. And we were living in a trailer, a 27 by 8 foot trailer. And one of the guys says, well, my daughter played sax in high school and it's been sitting in the closet for years. Take it home, and if he likes it, maybe it's not a very good horn, but maybe you can get him something better. So he brought home that alto sax to me. And I had played tonette or recorder a couple of years earlier in school, so I understood chromatic fingering.
Yeah. In our generation, everybody played tonette at one time.
Yeah. Well, so immediately, as soon as I could make a sound on the horn, I played the Tennessee Waltz, because I could figure out how to make a melody happen really easily.
Oh, okay.
And that was a popular song at that time.
You got to go up into the. I'm sorry. You have to go up into the higher octave on the third bar, right?
Yeah, but you know what? I managed to do it without knowing that. I think I blew an overtone without realizing, And but in any event, it worked. And I'll never forget, there was a music teacher that came to our grade school. And so the following week, I went in with my horn to take a lesson. And he took a look at my reed, which had lipstick all over it because it had belonged to this girl. And the reed was literally serrated on the end. And he said, young man, I don't know how you got a sound out of this. And he threw it in the wastebasket. He said, I'm going to give you a reed now, but from now on, they're 25 cents a piece. And
yeah.
was
I'd love to see a 25-cent reed now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, now, I buy a box of 10 saxophone reeds at a discount price of around $30,
Nifty. So you hit the ground running on alto.
Yeah.
And that was in elementary school. Now, have you always had good teachers in the school system?
For the most part, yes. There was one year when I was in high school, our band director had died in an auto accident. And he was really an inspiration to me. And so we had a new band director who wasn't very good. In fact, it was a lady, I think, who was probably in her first or second year of teaching. And the band was going nowhere. And in fact, my whole sophomore year, I could see I was already playing professionally, and we were going to do nothing in the band that was of any interest, and we needed tuba players. So I switched to tuba and played tuba for my whole sophomore year. And I taught myself how to play it. And it's the only time I've ever had one in my face, but I had so much fun playing the tuba that year.
Yeah, we don't like to tell anybody how simple it actually is, but if you
No, you guys always amaze me because you pick up horns and you might have a double B flat or a C or an E flat. And I'm thinking, how do you do the transposition? Because you're all reading bass clef music.
Oh, you don't. That's what you do. We all end up with a pretty good movable do is what happens.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was because I research all of my guests, or I try to research all of my guests to some extent, and you were, well, I think one of the reasons that you handled the heat so well and the rigors of being a musician is just because you were so athletic early on.
Yeah, well, I participated in athletics. I'm not going to say I was real athletic. I was probably better than average, but I always loved sports. And when I went to college, I went to Drake University, and I went in as a music ed major. And as such, I had to be in the marching band. Now, I had been in some marching bands in high school, but nothing really serious. And we had a new band director who came in from the University of Wisconsin, and he was really gung-ho, and he was really very good. But, we practiced 2 or 3 hours a day, and I was working gigs at night, and I thought, I hate this, and there's no way I'm going to teach somebody to do this. And so I had played sports all my life, and I thought, well, since I'm here, I'm going to switch my major to phys ed. So I went ahead and finished my college career. Both my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in phys ed.
Well,
And
but you also taught the world history and government also.
yeah, well, I minored in social science.
Okay.
So I taught American government, American history, world history, sociology, and boys and girls phys ed. And I was a high school principal for the last 3
I saw
years.
that on your resume. You fool.
It was, I didn't realize, but the last school where I taught was this real wonderful little school in southwest Iowa. And I had spent a couple of years at at Northwest Missouri State as director of admissions and assistant dean of administration. And so I was missing coaching. I was doing officiating, but I was missing the coaching. And so I went back into it. And when this school district hired me, I didn't realize they not only hired me to be a basketball coach, they knew their principal was going to retire after another year. So they had that in mind so when they approached me about taking over as principal, I said, well, I'll do it if I can keep my basketball job too, because I was the fourth coach in 5 years. And I just didn't want to see the kids experience another bit of uncertainty,
Sure.
have some stability in the program. And so it was really, it was a wonderful little school, about 400 kids in grade 9 through 12. And I'm still in touch with a lot of them.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of our Facebook friends of mine. And some of my old players still call once in a while, and we still talk about certain ball games, win or loss, So it created a great, totally separate set of memories. And I'm really glad I did it, because it was a wonderful part of my life.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I love teaching. I taught high school level. And I tried junior high level for one semester, and God bless the people that do that all the time, is all I have to say.
Well, I had,
I mean the junior high age.
yeah, I did. I'm trying to remember. It seems to me that I guess I never did any classroom teaching in junior high, just phys ed. But I was like kids.
Now, we completely skipped over something that I'm curious about, which is, how did you get introduced to improvisation?
Well, when I was 12, I got into my first band. There was a group of young guys, all teenagers, that heard me play in some talent show. And I was still playing my alto sax. And they had been playing, they were playing trad jazz. But you remember those stock arrangements that you could buy for trad jazz tunes? Those were written for a 4-horn front, trumpet, trombone, clarinet, and tenor sax. Well, they heard me play, and they asked me to join the band. And I said, okay, but I only had an alto sax, so I had to learn how to transpose that music from tenor parts to alto, play everything down a fourth, add a sharp or subtract a flat. And I started out by writing all the notes in, and then eventually got to the point where I could just look at the B flat part and automatically make that transposition to the E flat part. But also, of course, there were solo sections that the saxophone player had in these arrangements. And I remember one of the first times that we played in public, I was in Des Moines, Iowa, and the police department had a Dixieland band. And they had a saxophone player in the band, and I pulled him aside and I showed him my music. And I said, what do I do with this? Because, for example, if it was a B flat 7 chord, it would show the B flat, D, F, and A flat, all stacked, whole notes stacked,
Right.
And I said, what am I supposed to do with that? And he said, well, do what I do. He says, listen to the guys that know how to do it. he said, you can learn, and you should try to learn all the notes that each one of those chords represents. But that's a lot of memorization, and you do need to do that. But he said, in the long run, he said, have you ever listened to Louis Armstrong? And I said, well, yeah. He said, listen to him some more. And he said, he shows you the basis of how to improvise, because he basically plays the melody in his own way.
Right.
And that's the very first thing you need to learn how to do, is to get that melody in your head and play it, and learn how to make that melody your own. And so that's really what I did was, I joined one of those record clubs where I got new records every month.
Sure.
And I wore them out, and they were nearly all trad jazz things at that time. And I didn't get exposed to any other kind of music till I was about 15. I was a junior in high school, and I got a job playing lead alto in a big band. And I could read pretty well, and I had a good sound on my alto. And it was about that time that I also got a tenor and started playing clarinet too. And by that time I had moved to a different high school and had a really, really fine band director who was a reed player that was one of the top call players in town for all the Broadway shows.
Oh boy, did you luck out there?
I really did, yeah. A guy named J.B. Snyder. He was really great. And he took me under his wing. And by the time I was in middle of that junior year, he was sending me out on gigs to sub for him when he got double booked. And I went to a school that had by then that high school had a good tradition of music. You remember the bass trombonist George Roberts?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, he went to my high school. And Roger Williams, the piano player.
Sure.
When his name was Louis Wirtz.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He went to my high school. And there was just a tradition there of having good musicians.
Louis Wirtz doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
No, it doesn't. I mean, his agent came up with the name Roger Williams. When Louis moved to New York before he recorded Autumn Leaves, his agent, and this was mid-50s,
Sure.
said, you can't have that name. His father was a Lutheran minister at the biggest Lutheran church in Des Moines.
Yeah, my mom was a huge fan of Rogers, and it's kind of funny that he ended up basically as a really important Christian player.
Yeah, well,
anyway.
like I said, his dad was a Lutheran pastor. In fact, my mom was a practical nurse, and she worked in a retirement home, and she took care of Louis' folks when they were in their waning years. And he used to come and visit his parents about once every 6 or 8 weeks. And she said he would go to the rec room and play for hours for all the people there. He was a really nice guy. He was a good athlete too, by the way. Most people don't know that he went to Drake and on a music and basketball scholarship. And he was a boxing champion in the Navy.
Wow.
And he always seemed a little bit prissy, but he really wasn't. When I was a senior is when Autumn Leaves was popular, and he came back to visit his folks, and he came to our school and did an impromptu last period concert for the whole school.
Wow. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So you've just been surrounded by this kind of talent.
Yeah, been lucky. Been very lucky.
I was really interested. I mean, I know you already mentioned slugging out at Orlando, but you also played at Opryland.
Yes, I did. That's when I left teaching. I got hired to play Opryland the first year they opened.
It's always nice to meet a fellow person who's done the theme park battles. There's a special thing about doing those gigs that we all can relate to. That is, it's totally its own thing, It
really is. It's, I have to say that I could never buy into the idea that I was going to work in theme parks for the rest of my career on a full-time basis. But I'm still status at Disney World, and I still, on rare occasions, go out and play with the band at the Grand Floridian.
Sure.
And that's just about the extent of it. A couple years ago, for the whole summer, they ran a program with a 40-piece orchestra playing the music from the Pixar films. And that was one of the best gigs I've ever had in a theme park. It was just super. But at Opryland, I had never been exposed to that element of the business. So that was an education, but it was a good way for me to move into music again full time.
Cool. Yeah, you played with some at some great places and with some great people from, I guess from Nashville. You went to New York, right, and played with the Nighthawks.
Actually, I went from Nashville to Pennsylvania for a few years. I married my second wife, who was from the Johnstown, Pennsylvania area. And so I lived up there from 74 to 80. And I had my own lounge group. And there were some good musicians in Western Pennsylvania.
So you didn't do polkas all the time?
No. No. Those bands existed, and some of those guys could really play, but I didn't have to do much of that. I had a lounge group with a girl singer who was really good, and the band was fine. But I missed being in an area where I could be more into a lot of different kinds of music full time. So things were going south with the marriage. And so I literally went south and came to Orlando in 1980.
Okay.
And I got status at Disney World pretty shortly after I got here. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then I got tired of marching around in the world band. And I went to Hawaii and worked on a cruise ship. And while I was there, I met a girl who was singing and an actress, and her contract was up. She went back to New York. Well, shortly after that, we got laid off because the economy was really bad at that in 1982.
Right.
So I went to New York, and I only knew one person in New York, and that was Dick Oates, who was the lead alto player with the Village Vanguard Band. And I had known Dick since he was a baby because I had played in his father's band back in Iowa. And so Dick gave me a bunch of names of people to contact, including Vince. And so I got in touch with Vince and took the subway out to his house and read some music for him. And then he started using me. And I was only there for about 7 or 8 months. And then Disney World called me. They had opened the Epcot park and they were adding a band, and they wanted me to lead this new band they were putting on. So I moved down to Orlando then, and I've been here ever since. That was in 1983.
Right. And then you got hooked up. Is that where you met Bill, or was it at Rosie's?
I met Bill here. Bill had left town for a few years, and he was coming back here either from Reno or Sacramento. And there used to be a Monday night jam session at this one club in town, and I was off on Mondays. And the guy who ran the jam session, I had heard about Bill, but we came from the same part of the country, but didn't know each other back there. Well, this one guy who put on these jam sessions says, Bill Allreds coming back to town. He's going to be here next Monday. You need to come in and hear him and play with him. I said, okay, I'd love that. So I went in and I listened to Bill play the first set and then asked him if he'd mind if I'd sit in. He said, no, get your horn, come on up. So we played a couple tunes together, and he leaned over to me after the second tune. He said, do you play clarinet? And I said, well, some, because my clarinet chops were really bad then. And he said, we have to talk. because we hit it off immediately. I mean, as soon as we started playing together, it's like we'd been doing it our whole lives. And so we got together next week and had lunch and talked over some possibilities. And next thing you know, he hadn't gone back to Rosie's yet. He put a lounge group together. And so I played in that with him. And then we lost that gig, and that's when I went to Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
And while I was gone in Hawaii and New York is when Bill took back over the Rosie's band. So then when I moved back here for Disney, I started subbing with Bill down at Rosie's and played there with him until I think he left around 89, I think he left Rosie's. And in fact, Rosie's offered me the job of leader after Bill left. And I knew I wasn't going to stay there without Bill. And so I told Bill, I know you're going to get something else going. And when you do, I want to be a part of it. And the next year he put together the classic band.
Yeah. Well, Rosie's was some kind of gig. You know,
it was great.
With the girls hanging from the flagpoles and cannons going off. And I went through there in 1980 when I was touring with Golden West Southern Comfort Band. And had a chance to watch the show. It was.
Who was in that band with you?
Oh, that was Dan Barrett and Brian Shaw and Bob Reitmeyer and it's Lawson on drums and I was on tuba and Howard Alden.
What a great band.
Yeah, it was a good band. But we went through there. We went through both Orlando and Rosie's as part of our tour. And
we used to have the Southern Comfort Band come through every year.
Yeah, we were the first band. We were the first Southern Comfort band. But none of those guys did anything with their career since then. But you know,
I met Howard and Dan when I was in New York. And Howard used to sub some with Vince.
Yeah.
And we used to rehearse every other Friday at the Red Blazer.
Yeah, you may want to take a look at some of the interviews on my channel because I've done both of those guys. As interviews, and of course, interesting fellows, you know.
Yeah, they are, and super talent, both of them.
So tell me what it was like to front the Benny Goodman band.
Well, it wasn't. You got to remember, there is no
right. There's no official ghost band, right?
No, there isn't. Benny specifically did not want that to happen. The guy who was the agent for the Tommy Dorsey band contacted me about starting a Goodman tribute band. And I said, why did you come to me with that? I'm primarily a sax player. What makes you think I could do this? And he said, Buddy Morrow says you could. And
well,
yeah, and Buddy was my Goomba, you know. Buddy introduced me to my wife and really groomed me to be a big band leader. But so the funny thing was, I said, well, I'll think about it. And that was in 1990. And 2 years later, I was out on the road with the Dorsey band with Buddy. I'd been out for about 3 months, I guess. And of course, this was before we had cell phones. And my phone rang in my room, and it was this agent. And he said, Buddy tells me you're getting off the band the 1st of September. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I have you booked into Busch Gardens on October 1st with your tribute to Benny Goodman. Okay. I had no charts, nothing, you know. So as soon as I got home, I started beating the bushes to find some arrangements and calling guys to put a band together. I did know, you know, most of the players here in town then. Well, I don't even remember where I got the charts, but they weren't really that good. But I managed to have one rehearsal before we went to Busch Gardens. And In fact, about three or four of the guys who were going to play the gig couldn't even make the rehearsal, sent subs for the rehearsal. So we went to Busch Gardens, and the day that we played there, we played in this amphitheater, the Stanleyville Theater. And they had a monsoon rainstorm that day, and there must have only been about 60 people in the entire park. And when you were on stage in this amphitheater, the inside of the theater was so full of fog that you couldn't see past the first row of people. And I don't think we probably had more than 10 or 15 people in the amphitheater. Well, we really sucked. We were really bad. But the guy who hired the band had caught a bad cold or the flu, and he wasn't there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So the next week he talked to my agent, and he was really apologetic to my agent about the bad break we got on the weather and the fact he hadn't been there to hear us. So he gave us 2 more dates in February of the next year. Well, now I had time to, I hooked up with Rick Gerber and bought a bunch of good arrangements from Rick. And then I got some from the Yale Library, where Benny's stuff was. And then I was able to patch the holes and put together a good band and rehearse it a couple of times. And then we went back to Busch Gardens in February of '93, and they loved it. And it's still, but at that time I was playing first tenor, and then I would put my horn down and play all of the clarinet solos. And then, you know, I was like a one-armed paper hanger trying to lead the band and talk to the people and play clarinet and tenor and that.
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do.
No. So after a couple of times doing that, I said, no, I got to hire a whole sax section and just stand in front of the band. And then life became a lot easier. Well, so it turned out there are some really, really wonderful players here in Orlando. And I had people like John Allred on lead trombone.
Oh, yeah.
Charlie Bertini on lead trumpet, and
Bobby Pickwood.
Bobby Pickwood. Actually, I didn't. I can't remember if I had Bobby. I don't think I had Bobby in that band. I can't remember why, because we were really good friends and still are. But anyway, Bobby wasn't in that. But anyway, it ended up getting a lot of work, and it became a really, really tight group. As if you have that recording, you can hear.
Yeah.
And I was just surrounded with really good players, and that's what really made it go. Was the quality of the ensemble was so good. When you have Eddie Metz playing drums, you really can't go too far wrong.
Oh, one of my favorites. You know, I had a chance to play with Eddie up at Mammoth.
Oh yeah.
Lakes on just a kind of a thrown together set, and I've never experienced sitting in an easy chair during a gig. It's just, I need to get him on the show for an interview. It's interesting that you were doing the Benny Goodman thing when there really wasn't a ghost band, because I was talking to Mike Vax,
Mm-hmm.
and he does a Kenton band,
Right.
and Kenton specified that he didn't want any ghost bands either. So anyway, it's kind of interesting that these guys who are cherished by the fans put that stipulation in their wills, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you the story on Benny firsthand. One of the people I became well acquainted with once I started this, I wanted to make sure there was no legal problem with what we were doing. So I got in touch with the man who was the executor of Benny's estate. And his name was Bill Highland. And he was the Attorney General of New Jersey. And he was Benny's personal attorney. And it turns out Bill had a place down here in Naples, and he went back and forth between Naples and New Jersey, and we got to be good friends. And in fact, when Benny passed away, he had 3 clarinets. He had 2 B flats and an A, all buffet, even
Wow.
though he was a Selmer artist. He played buffet.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of his A clarinet went to the Smithsonian, and one of his B flats went to Carnegie Hall, and the other B flat Bill Hyland had. And because Bill was a pretty good clarinet player himself. And we did a concert in Naples, and I had Bill come out and do a song with us, but I did almost the entire show playing on Benny's horn, which he let me use. It was great. But I asked Bill about that Benny's wishes on No Ghost Band. And he said, here's what happened. He said, I had prepared Benny's will. It had already been signed. A lot of people thought Benny put it in his will, but he did not. He said, but I was trying to talk Benny. He was in his 80s. He said, I wanted him to, we had discussed whether or not he would approve a ghost band. And he basically was against it. But he said he was coming in to meet with me about other matters. And he said, I prepared a T-scale of all the pluses and minuses on one side and the other. He said the pluses far outweighed the minuses, particularly with the amount of money that could go to Benny's estate once he was gone. And he said Benny very slowly looked and opened down the page. He said he looked at it for about 5 minutes. And he said, he finally looked up at me and said, I still don't want it. And he said, I thought you probably would say that. And he already had prepared a letter for Benny to sign as a codicil to the will that he did not want there to be. But he said, I tried to talk him into it, you know, and he said, Benny wouldn't hear of it. His thing was he was such a perfectionist and he didn't think he could trust somebody else to be going out under his name that wouldn't be as much of a perfectionist as he was.
Oh, yeah. I talked to Dan Barrett a little bit about Benny because Barrett was in his last band.
Yeah, Dan played with him. Of course, Kenny Poplowski, who
Right.
does a fabulous job doing that, you know, and they both got to know Benny very well, but he was not going to have it.
No, and to put it nicely, he was fairly insistent when he had his mind made up. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are a lot of stories. And a lot of them are negative, although, you know, I knew so many people that played with Benny, and I think I have a pretty good lead on who he was.
Yeah.
And I always liken him not so much as a bad person as more of a college professor type who can't see the forest for the trees sometimes.
Well, as you know, I'm another example of something like that. I knew trombonist Chuck Anderson. Did you know Chuck?
Not personally.
Yeah, he played with Harry James in the last 10 or 12 years of that band. And he was telling me that Harry just wouldn't be friends with any of his band members because he knew he had to be the boss also. So
Yeah.
he tried to keep himself distanced, which of course gives you the impression that he's being aloof or something, but it's just a business decision. And I
That's
think
the way
a
he was.
lot of
that's-
successful band leaders have forced themselves to do that, to be that person.
Yeah, and you know, Harry he had played for Benny, you
Right.
know, and he had done a lot of hard work playing the circuses and so on. When I had my band in Pennsylvania, we got hired to go to St. Louis and play a big convention thing, and we altered sets with Harry's band, the one that Chuck was on.
Right.
And Lynn Roberts was singing with the band, and Harry sat backstage with a bottle of orange juice and a bottle of vodka and didn't talk to anybody. Just sat there and drank.
There was also, Chuck told me that they would never leave a gig until Harry got laid, but that's a different story.
Yeah, you know, I had this young singer. She was about 22 years old. She was gorgeous and really good singer, but she was a kid, you know. And she came up to me. She says, see that old guy over there with the gray hair? He just hit on me. And it was Harry, you know. I said, Denise, you're lovely, but don't feel like he just hit on you. He hits on everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I was looking down here at my sheet I have on you, and my God, you played with everybody, and you led quite a few of the bands on top of it. I guess you led the Artie Shaw Orchestra for a while.
I did just one short tour back in 2001, and I remember that because it was only but a little over a month after 9/11.
I wouldn't think that book would be quite as difficult as Benny's book.
Well, for me, oh, they're so totally different.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
But it's actually harder
Okay.
in some ways. And particularly now, see, Dick Johnson was leading the band at that time. And he was a marvelous clarinet player. And he got ill. And he called me like 4 or 5 days. In fact, I was just coming home from Sun Valley Festival. And he called me and wanted to know if I could go out and lead the band for a couple of weeks. He had an aneurysm on the artery between the heart and the kidneys. And his doctor said, you cannot go ride the bus. You cannot travel. So I went out and I had no chance to really prepare. I had time when I got home to book my flight up to Maryland to meet the band. And the band had a problem with the bus. It didn't get to the first show until 10 minutes before showtime. So, the producer had talked to the audience. The audience was cool about it, but, the guys are in their street clothes setting up the band in a hurry. And the road manager walked in and handed me my book. And he says, I'm so sorry. We were going to be here 4 hours ago, but, we just got. So he hands me the book and I open it up and I start looking and all of Artie's solos were written out. And the guy's name was Dave Chapman, a great lead alto player. I said, Dave, I'm a pretty good reader, but I'm not going to be able to go up on the stand and read this like this. He said, don't worry about it. Do your own thing. So I did. Then during the course of the tour, when I get to my room, I'd pull out one of the charts and I'd work on incorporating some of the stuff into my solos. But I really just would wing it all the way through. The band was so great. But I'd been doing the Goodman thing for almost 10 years then, and I was so struck by how different harmonically the music was, how much more it was much more advanced harmonically than
Okay.
And both books are great, but there's such a totally different musical approach.
Well, I have to admit, for a long time, I sort of grouped Benny and Artie and Woody all kind of in the same basket,
Yeah.
And they're really not.
Not at all. Yeah, and Woody's another totally different thing, And I remember talking with Buddy DeFranco about it. And he was more moved by Artie than anyone because of being more modern,
Yeah.
But Buddy made the comment to me. He said, Benny must be twirling in his grave. He said he didn't want a ghost band. He said there must be 1,000 tribute bands.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you know, Benny spent a lot of his later career trying to tackle that classical monster.
Yeah, he was into Mozart. Yeah.
So I found that fascinating when during that section. Tell me a little bit about Terry and the Pirates.
Terry, back in, I think it was 2000, I'd been going to Mammoth Lakes Festival with Bill Allreds' band. And
I was up there during those years, yeah.
Yeah, we loved going to Mammoth. I mean, I loved going to Mammoth. The altitude, the only thing that bothered me was it took me a day or two for my ears to get acclimated to that.
I remember they used to have an oxygen tank on every stage.
Yeah, they quit that in later years. I guess there was some sort of a California law that made that impossible. But anyway, yeah, they had the oxygen tanks. I remember Charlie Bertini had to use them one night. But anyway, Ken and Flossie called me once for that year, and I had been leading a big band every year at the festival. And Bill had some previous commitments to go to Europe with the Wild Bill Legacy Band. So the Allred Band wasn't going to go to Mammoth. So Ken and Flossie asked me to put a band together because they wanted me to be there to lead the big band. So as it turned out, the Black Dogs weren't going to be going there either. And of course, they were an Orlando band and they were all pals.
Great
So
band.
I made an amalgamation really of the Allred band and the Black Dog band. I had Charlie Bertini on trumpet and Pat Galata, who had replaced Yoke on trombone. And by
Right.
the way, did you hear that Yoke passed away?
Just yesterday, yes.
Yeah, I heard it yesterday. I was really sorry to hear that. Anyway, so it was Charlie and Pat and me in the front line. And then Eddie on drums and Jay Mueller from the Allred band on bass and Bob Leary on banjo and guitar and Jeff Phillips from the Allred band. Originally it was going to be Tom Hook, but then Tom had to back out. And so I got Jeff Phillips. So anyway, to make a long story short, we had no intention of putting that band together again, just go to Mammoth and have some fun. And we had a ball. And moved the clock ahead about 17 years. And Eddie was playing with an all-star group that Alan Bichet had put together. He was playing at the Suncoast Festival in Clearwater. And Joan Dragon asked Eddie, can you think of another band that we would like here that we've never had here? And he said, you know, have you ever heard of Terry and the Pirates? Because that's the name I gave it. Just when Ken asked me
It's
to
a great
name
name.
it, all I could think of was that comic strip from when I was a kid, you know, Terry and the Pirates. So he told Joan about it. And of course, she knew who all the guys in the band. She said, wonderful. So they hired us to do the Suncoast Festival. So it was 18 years between the time that we played in Mammoth before, and we'd never been together. I mean, we were all friends, but had never been together as a group again after we played at Mammoth.
There's some pretty good talent in that group. I'm just kidding. I saw Ken and Flossie at the last LAX festival. And so I managed to reconnect with them then, but great folks.
Oh, we love Ken and Flossie. They're just fabulous. They came here and they stayed with us when Eddie and Joyce got married. And they stayed at our house and we had so much fun with them.
Good people, just out good people, you know. So after we get done with all of this nonsense happening in the world, what kind of gigs have you got lined up?
You know, the Dorsey band we weren't really that busy this year anyway, but the last time we played was in January. We did a Battle of the Bands with the Glenn Miller band. And I think we have a couple of those.
Who's running that band now?
Nick Hilscher.
Okay.
Yeah, Nick's he does a great job with the band. He's a good singer. In fact, when Buddy died, Nick was singing with us. And Buddy's widow, Carol, asked me to lead the Dorsey band, but I couldn't because I had a whole bunch of dates with my Benny Goodman tribute band that were in the same venues that the Dorsey band was playing, like a week before or a week after. So it was just not going to look good.
No, just change uniforms, right?
Yeah. So Nick took over the band and he led the band, what little bit of work they did, for almost a year. And then he had been with the Miller band for quite some time before. And they asked him to take over the Miller band. So he did. And then Carol came to me and I had time now enough to go ahead and take over the Dorsey band. So she still manages the band, and so I work for her actually, and then she pays Steve Dorsey the royalties whenever we work.
Do you miss doing small band stuff? Do you miss doing more Dixieland trad type things at all?
No, I enjoy doing it all.
Yeah.
You know, I love doing straight ahead quartet things or trad band stuff. Actually, I only had one more gig still on the books, which was going to be next month in Palos Verdes at the Norris Center, doing a Goodman tribute with an LA band, and that's been postponed again to next year sometime. But that was, now that book that's gone off the books, I don't think I have anything for the rest of the year.
You know, I have a couple ex-students and college age kids that are falling in love with the big band sound and wanting to do those type of things. And I just, in this economy, it's so hard to get 20 musicians, you know, all at a gig and get them paid.
Well, yeah. And you know what? I mean, and I'm not going political on this, and I don't, and I'm
it's
not
okay.
But I did get a call a couple of days ago. There's a big band that I play with here called the Space Coast Jazz Orchestra. And they're going to do a couple of outdoor concerts next month, and they're just organizing it now. And they asked me to play, and I turned it down because I can't. My wife is vulnerable. She has lupus, you know, an autoimmune disease. I've been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, although I'm not really suffering any of the vagaries of that. But in any event, we both have autoimmune deficiencies. And so I can't go sit in the middle of a big band right now, especially sitting in the front row with 8 brass players blowing in my direction, you know?
Well, that's never fun anyway.
So anyway,
I always talk about, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I always talk about how trumpet players and trombone players never get along because trombone players are just tired of having them in the back of their head. But anyway.
Yeah, but you know, isn't it amazing when you talk about big bands and trombone players, isn't it kind of unique that almost all of the great arrangers in the big band business were trombonists?
Yes, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Other than Strayhorn, of course, but.
Yeah, but you know, and he was such a lovely composer. But I have a theory in that I think trombone players have historically, the way most big bands physically set up, been positioned where they hear the entire band better than anyone else. Because I've had trumpet player friends of mine listen to a big band recording we were on, and they'll say to me, I didn't know what you guys were doing up there. I couldn't hear you. You know, I couldn't hear it till I hear the playback on the recording, because while we're doing it, they couldn't hear it.
Not only that, the tenor voice is so important to the big band arranging, and having that middle voice that trumpet players never hear or don't care to hear, and of course, and of course you've got the entire spectrum with the sax section, but you're right, the trombones are situated where they can hear everything and especially hear their own parts. That tenor voice, which of course has usually all the counter melodies and.
Yeah, well, you know, you have Neil Hefti, Nelson Riddle, Sammy Nestico, Don Sebeski. My partner in my big band here for many years was a wonderful arranger named Dave Wolpe.
Oh, sure.
And Dave lives here. He lives about 10 miles from me, and we still get together as often. We haven't during the COVID thing, but we talk on the phone once or twice a week. And I've talked with Dave about that a lot. And he said that, you know, from the time he was in high school, he started writing because he was so enthralled by what he heard all around him.
Yep.
And I think that's probably the reason.
I agree with you totally. As just because of the fact of all the stuff I do, I ended up doing everything from small band to marching bands, and but when you have your accent towards tuba parts, it's a whole different thing. Anyway, Terry, I'm so glad you did this. I'm gonna sort of wrap things up here. But,
okay, Dan.
But I want to give you a chance to plug anything you have to plug. Your website, any arrangements you have available, whatever you would like to plug. this is your time.
Okay. Well, I will say, we had talked about Goodman and the tribute. I mentioned to you, I think, before we started that I work with a girl singer in Austria. When times are normal, I go over there once or twice a year, and she has a record company. She heard our big band recording of a tribute to Benny Goodman and loved it. And she wanted to know how she could get it. And I said, they're out of print. I did them on my own. And she said, would you mind if we were to reissue it? And I said, no, not at all. So it's been getting play in Europe and in Japan.
What she didn't tell you is she's going to overlay vocals. No, I'm kidding.
You know what? She's so good, I wouldn't mind. Her name is Simone Kopmeyer, and she is absolutely lovely lady. And she's become part of my family. Her husband is a drummer in the group. They have 3 little girls, one of them whom they named after my wife. And, she is so good. Check her out sometime.
Spell that name for me again.
Kopmeyer, Kopmajer.
Okay.
And Simone.
Excellent.
And we did an album in January of all bossa novas. And I flew over to Vienna and we did it, and then did some concerts. And then we did one a couple of years ago, same situation. I flew over and recorded an album, and then we did a whole bunch of concerts. But I have such a wonderful time with them. Scott Ellsworth played my album a couple of weeks ago in its entirety on a Sunday night show.
Okay.
Yeah, on Scott's Place.
And it's out of print.
Well, it was, but now it's available on Amazon, I think.
Excellent. Good deal.
Yeah. But Dan, when you say anything, there's nothing to plug right now because the business is pretty much, as you know, moribund. And I have so many younger friends that are really needing the work a lot more than I am. So I'm kind of
speaking of which, you just lost me. Are you
Wait
still there?
I'm on low battery.
Oh, I was just going to say, while you're at it, why don't you give some shout outs to some of the younger players that you know that are playing good early jazz?
Oh, well, I had a little conversation online with Evan Christopher recently. It was good we chatted back and forth on Facebook Messenger. I always admire him. Evan probably.
Oh yeah, well he played in the Misbehaving Jazz Band with me for several years.
Yeah, I watched Evan go through the transition of going from Bain system to Allreds system.
Yes.
It was really fascinating how he did it. He's so good. And for a while he was carrying both horns.
It's such an awkward stretch, but some guys like it because it forces them to think differently,
Well, and he really wanted the real sound.
Yeah.
And that's how you get it. But right now, I would just wish everybody good luck and hang in there. And you got to keep your chops up. You got to keep practicing.
Well, I hope we find some time and an opportunity to get on the same stage again.
Me too. I would love that.
It's obvious that you made quite an impression on me from 30 years ago, whenever it was we were hanging out and met. And I think of you often.
Well, same here, Dan. And say hi to all my friends there in Anaheim, Rusty Stiers.
Oh, gosh, yes. Brad Roth and the boys.
And Rob and all those guys. I taught with them at the Sacramento Tea Garden Jazz Camp.
Right.
For 15 years.
I will do.
Please say hi to them.
All right, sir. You take care now.
You too, Dan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Trad Jazz Today. Dan shows new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure to check out the archive of past shows, and please give us a thumbs up when you subscribe to the channel. Bye.